Welcome to Split Reels, the podcast where we deep dive into the world of movies. I'm Nate, and with me, as always, is Master Brody.
Hey, hey, hey.
Disclaimer, this is going to be a little all over the place. This is not going to follow chronologically in the slightest. Today, we're stepping into the eerie halls of the Overlook Hotel as we talk about The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's, and technically Stephen King's 1980s psychological horror masterpiece. This film has carved its way into the collective consciousness with unforgettable imagery, haunting performances, and a legacy of analysis and debate, and a legacy of some crazy people who think they can see everything in this movie. Stanley's adaptation of Stephen's novel may not have pleased the original author, but it has captivated audiences.
I am curious to dive into why Stephen King didn't like it.
I've got the answer for you, my friend. And I'll just do a little prelude to the listeners out there. At first, Stephen really didn't dislike it. He appreciated the performances by Duvall and Jack Nicholson. I mean, and you watch the movie, they're fucking amazing.
Their performances are hands down like what carries the movie.
I will say this, Jack Nicholson's performance, very good. Hers, mundane.
I mean, for what she went through, though, we can get into that too.
That was everybody in a Kubrick movie, though. It's not like she was singled out.
I do need to, for myself, I need to watch more Kubrick films.
Yeah, I got a couple on the list that you can watch. Kubrick doesn't necessarily lend himself to horror all the time, but the way he does move makes everything feel creepy.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was reading about this. There's another movie that he quoted as one of the scariest movies he ever saw. It's a film by David Lynch called Eraserhead.
Okay.
I've tried to watch it, and it's just so fucking out there and weird. That's where most of David Lynch's stuff. But he had everybody watch it to try to have an understanding of what he wanted to do with this movie and just being out there and making you feel weird in these situations. So that's kind of how he approaches these movies. I want you to feel weird, and I'm going to nitpick every fucking thing you do.
Yeah. I mean, that is like the approach to horror when, well, last time we talked about Scream, straight slasher.
Yeah.
And then we talk about this, which is more psychological horror. Everybody finds different things scary, right? So everybody's scared of the boogeyman, or they're scared of like things that actually can happen and that are creepy and whatnot.
Yep.
I mean, a few years ago when Robert Eggers' The Witch came out, that was being advertised as the scariest movie of the year.
Yeah.
And then you go see it, and I didn't really know what to expect from that movie. And it was very much psychological. And I still remember I went to the theater. There were only a handful of people in the theater. It was in the middle of the day on like a Sunday, I think. The credits roll, and there was a guy in the front row just like, what the fuck did we just watch?
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to say that there's movies that scare you and you walk away and you're like, oh, that was creepy. And then there's movies that just mess with your head and your brain instantly goes to, what the fuck was that? Mm-hmm. Eraserhead is one of those. And then there's a couple other ones that are like, what the fuck? I think for me, the thing that sets this movie apart from everything else, Kubrick is an amazing director. He's always been one. I mean, going from Eyes Wide Shut, his last movie, to Paths of Glory, everything in between that is just amazing, without even talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey. But the thing I really want to dive into is Jack Nicholson's eyes. His eyes in this movie are the scariest thing I have ever seen. Mm-hmm. And you can tell Kubrick likes this. You know, there's a couple shots throughout this movie and other Kubrick movies where the actor tilts their head down and looks up through the top, so you get a half moon on your eyes. And the way that Jack Nicholson does this, every time it looks like he's going to murder somebody. And he gets this just creepy look.
Yeah, my favorite scene out of the entire movie was kind of towards the end when he's just like walking at Wendy, like walking up those stairs and just like spewing his like pretty much like a monologue essentially. And yeah, that look on his face the entire time.
Yeah. I've watched some of the behind the scenes of like getting set up for the axe scene, going through the door and the here's Johnny and all this. But watching himself hype himself up for this, he like gets himself mad. He's like, oh, and he turns into this like monster, almost like Split. See that metamorphosis of like, oh, I'm gonna be somebody fucking scary now. It's cool to see that.
Yeah, I'd say Jack Nicholson is probably one of the best actors of his generation for sure.
For sure. They put him up there with James Cagney.
And he's still killing it today. I mean, even like The Departed and stuff, he was so good.
Well, he's killing it in life. The dude's had 20 wives that are 40 years younger than him. Dude can do whatever he wants. There's that famous picture of him just sitting in the ocean smoking a cigar with some young honey jumping up next. It's like, what kind of life is this? So we dove a little bit into the movie, but let's set the stage at the time when this movie came out a little bit. It's 1980. Jimmy Carter's still in office, and Ronald Reagan is about to win the biggest landslide election. Empire Strikes Back is dominating theaters, and Pac-Man is sweeping the arcades. And this is quintessential my time period. I love this time period. It is Stranger Things. It is the summer of '84, that kind of nostalgia feel.
One fun fact about 1980 that I think we will both appreciate, that was when the first gigabyte hard drive was available to be purchased.
No
and
way.
It was not a thumb drive.
Yeah, definitely not.
It was 1.26 gigabytes, and it was pretty much 1,000 pounds.
No way.
Yeah. They were packed in the cabinet the size of 2 refrigerators. And in today's dollars, it'd be $300,000.
Oh my God. My entire movie collection would be way too expensive. I can't imagine that. Just the ease of like, there's terabyte thumb drives now.
Yeah. I mean, they're micro.
Yeah. And I mean, think about it now too. The way that they looked at a gigabyte, we look at a petabyte now. We're like, oh my God, I could never fill up a petabyte. But I have to imagine in 10 years, we're going to be like, petabyte? That's nothing.
Yeah, we'll have 24K movies and shit.
Yeah. Zoom super far in and like, what was that wrinkle on his finger? It meant something. And if anybody who's watched this movie and is one of those crazy conspiracy theorists, you will be one of those people that'll zoom in on 24K and be like, that's what Kubrick meant.
However, going back to 1980, in the horror film landscape, slasher films are becoming more prominent thanks to Halloween that came out in the late 70s. But Kubrick is about to change the conversation with a film that digs deep into psychological horror. Released in May 1980, The Shining faced mixed reviews at the time. Stephen King, who wrote the novel in 1977, was famously not a fan of the film adaptation, calling it cold and unsympathetic, but we'll get to that later on. Kubrick's approach was meticulous, taking the bare bones of King's narrative and infusing it with a chilling ambiguity and visual mastery. Instead of focusing on a supernatural external force, Kubrick emphasized Jack's slow descent into madness, asking viewers to question whether the hotel is haunted or if it was all in Jack's mind.
I don't know if it was necessarily slow. And that is one of the reasons that King may have not liked the movie.
So with that in mind, let's dive into the plot, because I think it's a little slow.
Right. It is. And this is a visual masterpiece of the movie.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's a character study. Maybe a character study of the hotel itself. And then the people, how they interact within it. The shots in this movie are absolutely beautiful. They're looking at like almost every scene is this long tracking shot from a far distance to make you feel like you are the hotel or you're a member of it. The movie follows the plot of the book pretty well. There's just a couple of small changes in there, and it really goes in to talk about who Kubrick is.
The biggest change is that they Kubrick strips away that. He makes it more ambiguous about what actually is happening.
Yeah, he does.
At least my understanding of the book. I haven't read the book.
Same. I never read the book either. I've tried to read a couple of Stephen King's books, and I have found it very complicated for me to read, but that's because I have the reading level of like a third grader. This is why I talk about movies and not books, people. Now, he changed things. He kept it ambiguous because that's who Kubrick is. He wants the audience to kind of come up with these things. And I think that kind of stands the test of time of why this movie is such a big deal to this day and why people still talk about it. Most of the time, we would sit down and go scene by scene and talk about this movie. I don't think this movie requires that. I think what we want to do is talk about the bigger plot discussion and the differences between the book and the movie and the differences between the auteurs of both of them, because they both took this piece of source material, one having created it, one readapting it, and made it their own in a very unique way that most of the audience wouldn't be able to pick up on. I shouldn't say wouldn't be able to pick up on. Most of the audience isn't privy to
The average viewer.
Yeah, you have to sit down and watch this movie and take notes to really understand what Kubrick is trying to say compared to what King said in his book. And I'll just throw this out there right now. King said that this is the most autobiographical character he ever created, Jack Torrance.
Yeah, I mean, he went to a hotel in Colorado and wrote this book.
Right. And I think that's part of the reason he didn't like it is because he saw himself in this character so much. Throughout the movie, you can see Kubrick's adaptation of Jack Torrance being this distant man who's not good with his kids, who doesn't really want to have anything to do with his relationship with his wife, and just trying to dive into this work.
And you're kind of already introduced to him at that moment, right?
Right.
And he just gets crazier and crazier and crazier as the movie progresses. And do you think Stephen King is approaching it like, oh, this is an everyday person?
Yes, exactly. That is the differences between the two. When we're first introduced to someone else talking about Jack Torrance, it is Shelley Duvall's character. It's Wendy talking to the psychologist about, or the doctor about why her kid did what he did. He had that freak out session in the bathroom seeing the blood from the elevator. And she tells the story about Jack Torrance being, well, he came home a little drunk, a little more than normal, and he got upset and used a little bit too much force on the kid and dislocated his shoulder, which is instantly, as an audience member, at least in 2024 eyes, I look at him like,
it's a little different.
What the fuck was that?
Yeah. But I'm curious, back in 1980, would that still be looked at as like, oh, what the fuck? I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know either. I can't time travel. But I have to imagine it was a little bit less important.
It's probably more normalized.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it. So that's the first time we're introduced to that character in the movie, whereas King's adaptation, so I'm told because I have not read it, is much more of a likable character, typical dad who falls into a situation where, oh no, this hotel is making me a bad person. Whereas Kubrick's adaptation is showing this dude's already a dickhead and he just needs the straw that broke the camel's back. That just sends him over the edge. Just a little bit of, hey, yeah, you do this. There's that scene where Jack is talking to Delbert Grady, the one who murdered his family, the twins and his wife. And all Delbert Grady has to say is, your son's trying to bring a third party into this situation. And Jack just looks at him and goes, okay, I'll take care of that. And you're like, whoa. Where has all of your mind gone? That's the one thing you're like, all right, I'll go kill my kid now because he's trying to bring the other shiner in there.
So is there always somebody that can do the shining and see that within each of these families that have gone through this? Has there always been somebody like that, like Danny?
And just knowing a little bit of the lore of like what was continued on with Dr. Sleep, because I have watched that one as well.
Okay, I haven't watched that. I do want to see it though.
It's good, but it's dark. It's pretty dark. But it's good, and it does continue on with it and rectifies the change that Kubrick made of not burning down the Overlook Hotel at the end of The Shining.
Oh, okay.
The original book has the hotel burning down with Jack dying inside of it. Whereas, and you look at this, going on with what King said this was a cold adaptation of a character. Kubrick totally leans into that, and he's like, look, instead of
this person die with hypothermia.
Yeah, has him die with hypothermia. You see that difference in there, and it really shows the different perspectives of the authors and how they viewed that character.
So Dr. Sleep is a direct sequel to the Shining movie.
Yes. In fact, the main character in Dr. Sleep is Danny, but older, played by Ewan McGregor, and it's actually really good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the director is Mike Flanagan. Love everything he does.
I don't recognize the name.
So Mike Flanagan, he did Hush. It was about a deaf person having a home invasion.
No. Oh, yeah.
Which is really cool. And she fought back and whatnot. He did The Haunting on Hill House for Netflix, Midnight Mass. You saw that. They're all really good miniseries.
I have to check that. Yeah. People told me about The Haunting on Hill. Did he do the next one too?
The Fall of the House of Usher, The Haunting of Bly Manor, and Midnight Club. I think they're all great. Midnight Club was a little bit of a miss for me, but all the other series are great.
It was a good movie, and Rebecca Ferguson is in it that woman is amazing. I found out recently that she has a child that's like 17 years old.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How old is she?
She's like 42, I think. Kind of blew my mind.
Anyway, well,
Yeah. We're kind of like tiptoeing around the idea of the differences of the auteurs. I think the one thing that all of you listeners out there should know is this idea of auteur theory when it comes to making a movie. There are some directors that subscribe to this, and there's some directors who are just like, whatever, I'm just going to make a movie. Auteur theory is the idea that the director making the story, that is their work of art, and they can change it in any way. Anything that happens in that movie is because of the director.
I guess I would subscribe to that. It should be their vision, unless there's obviously studio interference and things along those lines. But for the most part, it should be the director's vision.
Right. And I agree with that too. And Kubrick takes that to the max. He's like, I will do everything I can to make this movie absolutely perfect. As far as going, like doing over 100 takes in some of these scenes, causing people to cry.
We don't need to say people. Causing Shelley.
Well, Shelley, but also not just Shelley. Kubrick will do hundreds of takes on every scene, and it just drives these actors absolutely mad. Bringing in, and this is the coolest name I've ever heard in my life, Scatman Crothers, who plays Dick Halloran.
His name is Scatman?
His name is Scatman. That is the coolest name. Why don't we have names like that anymore?
Well, you should have named your kid Scatman.
Very true. I'm not going to do that if I made my daughter Scatman. It would be the end of her life. But it made him cry on multiple occasions. He cried during the scene when Dick Halloran, Scatman, is talking with young Danny right as they first meet after doing the, hey, do you want some ice cream, talking in each other's heads. He explains The Shining and how people shine. They did that scene like 85 times to the point where Scatman stands up and looks at Cooper and goes, I'm sorry, what do you want from me? And started to cry. Yeah. I can't imagine if I have to do the same thing over 20 times, 40 times, 60 times. The 80th time, that time I'd be like, what am I doing wrong here? And that's just who Kubrick is. He wants every minute detail documented and done.
I mean, to do it 100 times, you know what you want, but you don't know how to tell somebody what you want.
Right.
And he's just trying to find that needle in the haystack. True performance.
And in this, it's a masterpiece. It's virtually flawless. There's some weird things with things being missing and cut shots and blah, blah, blah.
But yeah, I will say this is one of the few Kubrick movies I have watched. I do need to watch more, but his directing is masterclass.
Yeah.
The opening scene where it's that aerial shot kind of zooming in slowly onto the mountains, giving you that feeling of isolation, like you're zooming out and zooming in and getting to the Overlook Hotel.
I just want to jump in on that and say that you're coming from the sky watching this.
Yeah.
So you're this bird's eye view following that score that's just haunting, just as recognizable as the Halloween music. That scene is masterclass. Fun little side fact, that scene's done with a helicopter filming. If you watch the end of Blade Runner, it's very similar to that. And that's because the director took the actual filming Kubrick had done and used that same thing at the ending of Blade Runner.
Oh, interesting.
He reached out to him and said, hey, I'm looking for this shot. I'm trying to try to do this. And Kubrick sent it to him and said, do not use anything that was in that movie. But he gave it to him and said, you can use it. So it's literally the same filming of both the end of Blade Runner 2049 and the beginning of The Shining.
But it's a similar shot?
Well, it's not a similar shot. It is the same shot.
Oh, okay.
The same helicopter filmed, and during the same time, they just used the extra film and gave it to Blade Runner to run the end of Blade Runner. Not Blade Runner 2049, the original Blade Runner, sorry.
Okay. That shot, it sets up the central tension of the film. And then there's also other scenes when he has the axe and he's going in swinging. It's that tracking shot that goes back and forth, left and right. When I saw that, I was like, oh.
Fucking amazing. And Kubrick literally did that by himself. He moved the camera
just going
doing that.
just
Boom,
side to
boom.
side.
But you follow that axe going down.
Yeah,
and
I was
you're
like, that's perfect.
Yeah. And there's no other way to do that. Like looking at it now, if you just watch him throw the axe, you're like, yeah, that's scary. But adding that little bit of movement in there, It's like the scene in Glorious Bastards where Christoph Waltz looks at her and he says, "You need to wait for the cream," but he says it in French, so it sounds a hell of a lot better than "wait for the cream." That is that perfect little cherry on top to that scene that just makes it like, whoa. One thing that I didn't pick up the first few times I watched this movie, but watching it this time and actually taking notes, it was really nice to see the black screen where it said Wednesday and broke up the story, almost like chapters from a book.
Yeah, it was interesting, the title cards, just kind of going by the days. I found very fascinating.
At first it said the interview, and it's just a basic point of time. Then it said closing day, and then it went to 1 month later, and you're like, whoa, okay. And then it started doing days, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Monday, Wednesday. And then it went to 8 a.m., 4 p.m., and that was the last one that I remember.
Kubrick carefully depicts Jack's slow descent into madness throughout the movie.
I don't think it's slow.
I do think he already appears annoyed, irritated, like not all the way there, but then it really like amplifies itself when you get to the famous all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy scene where Wendy finds everything that he's been writing the entire time that they've been there. It's just that phrase over and over. That scene was amazing. Like all the different ways that he could write it. Every page was different.
They actually wrote that, and the sound that you hear when he's typing is all work and no play. Jack is a dull boy. So, because Kubrick, obviously this mastermind that he is, he recorded himself typing that over and over and over. And you can, if you go back and listen, you can hear like the different keystrokes, like how it matches the words.
The same
work
thing over and
and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Just like when you dial a phone number, if you dial the same number, you can start to pick up the pattern.
In different languages, in different movies, they changed the phrase that is said and written to a bunch of different ones. They didn't hit home the same way that like all work and no play makes Jack. None of them were personal. They're all like, if you wake up early, it doesn't make the sun rise any faster. And I feel like that took away from the whole movie.
Yeah, they're trying to change it for the culture of...
Just say the fucking words. They'll pick up on it later.
The one scene that I was a little confused about, like the isolation stuff, was when Wendy is running and sees the man in the bear costume. Where is this coming from?
Where did the furry come out of? Why is this here?
Yeah, because what was it? The person in the bear costume giving the other person a blowjob, essentially?
So the scene where Wendy is running and sees a room where a man in a bear costume is having sex with a former hotel manager was never really explained. But in the book, apparently...
So that was in the book?
The manager in the book had a homosexual affair with a party guest dressed in a dog costume, which is the closest explanation. And I'll tell you, my sources on that are very scant. It is IMDb trivia. That is as far as I got with that one, because no one else really talked about it. But when I watched it, just like you, I was like, what the fuck was that? Because he's going to town, and then they both just come up and just look at Wendy. And you're like, what the?
When I saw that, I was confused as to if Wendy was starting to feel the isolation and start to go a little bit insane or not. But also, speaking of like homosexual references, there is a theory out there that Jack himself is a closeted homosexual. At the beginning of the movie, he's reading a Playgirl magazine.
I did see that.
Kubrick wouldn't put that in there for just a random ass magazine.
And that's the problem with this entire movie.
That you can analyze all
Yes, because you can just instantly fall back on the idea of saying it's Kubrick.
Yeah, because he doesn't do anything for no, everything has a meaning.
Every fucking thing has a meaning.
Yeah.
And I mean,
because that could play into like he's never liked his wife, never enjoyed having kids, all that kind of stuff. So
I would subscribe more to the theory that maybe he's bisexual, because there's that scene where he makes out with that hot girl, and he's like, you can see his eyes again, Jack Nicholson's eyes change, and he's like, ooh, let's go. This girl wants to fuck me. And then she turns into the crazy zombie lady.
Going back to the isolation part of it, do you think Jack was predisposed to this madness for the events of the film, or is the hotel to blame for his transformation? Because I think that also kind of can play into the different versions between Stephen King's and Kubrick's.
I think that's the biggest thing with this movie, is it depends on what your source material was the first time you listened to it. If you watch the movie first, you would say that he was predisposed to this. He was already on the verge of tipping. But if you read the book, you would see that this is just a normal guy with a family, and he fell into this because of the evil of the hotel.
In the book, it was probably a slower descent into the madness than it's taking a normal man.
Yeah, I think from the reading I've done about the book is that you see more of a personification of Jack and seeing that he's a normal guy in the book, rather than in this movie, you instantly see him as like, ooh, you're kind of a dickhead already. You're a little crazy to begin with, and you just need that little push to go over the edge.
He definitely gets.
Right. He definitely gets it, and it's fun to watch that character go through that change.
Another difference between Stephen King and Kubrick's probably is like the supernatural versus kind of the psychological of, is the Overlook Hotel actually haunted, or is this a reflection of Jack's mind going insane?
Yeah. I would say that Kubrick, I'm going to speak for Kubrick here. Kubrick saw that the hotel was haunted, but it needed a catalyst to keep going. Whereas King always saw things as intrinsically bad. Like, this is a bad thing. It's evil to begin with. It can do it on its own. Like Christine, the car. The car is this haunted car that goes out and kills people.
Okay.
Kind of interesting. But it's like there's intrinsically bad things that do bad. Whereas Kubrick saw it as like, this thing is evil, yes, but it needs a conduit to do bad things. And that's what Jack was. So it called to him.
I like the more ambiguous version of it. It could be either or, and leaving it up to the audience to decide. So.
I agree. As we said before, in lieu of going over scene by scene of this, I just hope that all of you will watch this movie. And I think Brody would say the same thing. I think you need to watch this movie one time.
Yeah, I definitely agree that this was like a quintessential moment in like horror history. It was a good anti-slasher movie of the time, and to actually make you think a little bit more about your horror movies. Slasher movies you didn't even think about.
No,
they're all the same.
It's mindless, but they're still scary.
Yeah, they have their place. They have their place, and I enjoy slasher movies. I also enjoy the psychological movies, and I think this is a really good one to kick that off. People nowadays have definitely gone further with psychological horror movies.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing movie to watch in the mindset of being in 1980. Trying to watch this movie and thinking like, there's no other movie that really came out like this beforehand. I mean, maybe Eraserhead, like I talked about before.
Oh yeah, but was that a mainstream movie?
No, not in the slightest. I mean, ask anybody, they'd be like, what the fuck is Eraserhead? It's a mind fuck of a movie, and it's fun to watch. So my whole thing is, let's not go scene by scene, because you'll all have watched it, hopefully. Let's talk about the conspiracy theories behind it. That's what I want to get into.
All right, let's dig into it.
Basically, this is a case study in what people do when they are left with ambiguity. When people have too much fucking time on their hands and they want to see the Jesus in the toast, they'll fucking find it. I ended up watching Room 237, which is a discussion about the conspiracy theories. It's a documentary about it. And the things that people were saying in this, some of them had some credence and could follow along. Some of them were like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, some lady thought she saw a minotaur in a poster of a skier. And I was like, that's obviously a skier. It says ski on it. And she was like, no, it means minotaur. But then again, I was sitting there thinking, I was like, well, there is a maze. And Jack is trying to get to the center of the maze. And who lives in the center of the maze? A minotaur.
What?
You don't know about Odysseus?
No.
Oh, this is classic Greek mythology then. Let me enlighten you. No, so
please enlighten me.
So basically there's, the Odyssey and the Iliad.
Yep.
I think it's in that, or it's just classic Greek mythology in general. There's a big maze in this building somewhere in Greece. I can't remember. The premise is that there's a minotaur, half man, half bull, that lives at the center of this maze. You have to go in, try to get to the center, and then defeat the Minotaur. So when you look at it in that light, you're like, well, there's the maze, and there's the shot where he's like looking down over the maze.
Yeah.
You can kind of see the symbology of that. My whole thing that I extrapolated from this movie, Room 237, which I watched after this, was that, one, you can see fucking anything in the reflection. You're looking at a reflection of the water and you're going, oh, what do I see in myself? That's what they're saying. Two, Kubrick is a genius, has always been a genius. And he put these things in there. This is just my personal point of view. He put these things in there to make this movie stand the test of time, just to get you to think and be like, oh, it's a mind bender of a movie to begin with. Is he really seeing these things? Is it in his head? Is it the family psychological trauma? What's going on? He put those in there to mess with the audience.
So do you think he purposely gave Danny that sweater to wear about the Apollo 11 one just to like fuck with people?
Yeah, 100%. And you can see like that's my thing, is I think he's just really trying to mess with people. Just my point of view. There is some credence to a lot of beliefs. I do think there's an overwhelming theme of the genocide of the American Indian within this. At the beginning of the movie, they start walking through the hallways of the Overlook Hotel and they go into the food store and you see this can of something and it's called like Calumet and it has a Indian on it, Indian head on it. Now, and I'm going to say Indian here because that's what they referred to it in the movie. And it's planting the idea that there's Native Americans in this movie.
Okay.
And then they continue to walk through the Overlook Hotel and they talk about royalty staying there, and the manager of the hotel kind of does like a little chuckle, haha, yeah, royalty. And then you see all the Native American imagery all around it, the classic like Navajo patterns on the wall with the tapestries and the pictures of Native Americans. And you can see that Jack is like throwing the ball at these things when he's sitting there. He's like kind of taunting it in a way, like making you feel like he doesn't give a shit about it in an unspoken of way. And then there's that guy who's sitting in the interview who doesn't really do much, but just kind of goes, yes, no. And it's kind of like commanded around. In Room 237, they make the comparison that he has darker skin, which I thought was a bit of a stretch, but they symbolize him as the Native American who is fallen into this class of, I will just be subservient because this is the role that I'm forced to play.
And I'm finding all this to be a bit of a stretch to me.
That's what I thought about the entire Room 237 movie. It was hard to follow because their ideas were so outlandish, and the way
was it just like random idea after random idea?
Yeah, they said like at the right at the beginning, they bring up, they're like, all right, here's 9 theories about what the movie is about. And I thought they would kind of do it in like an order, like here's the first theory, here's the second theory, here's the third theory. They just throw all the theories at you at once, and you're like, wait, what the fuck? It goes for everything from Jack Nicholson symbolizes Hitler, and you can tell that because at the final scene of the movie, if you slow it down frame by frame, it goes to Jack's face, and there's a little part that makes a Hitler mustache. And I was like, that's a fucking stretch.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it boils down to the whole thing in the toast. If you want to see the Jesus in the toast, you can find the Jesus in the toast, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You could do that with any movie nowadays too. You can
analyze
it.
Over-analyzing. And I think this is very pertinent to what is going on in life right now. If you want to sit down and over-analyze everything, you are going to find patterns.
That's you make the connections, yeah.
That's what our brain does as a human. We want to find patterns and want to find similarities in things. This was, I think Kubrick is a master class because of this. He put that out there to fuck with your head. That is what is out there. That's why he put the Apollo 11 sweater on Danny and him going up over like this, because I don't think Kubrick filmed the Apollo 11 landing.
You think we actually got to the moon?
Yeah, and I'll say this just for everyone out there, whether you believe me or not, thinking about all the engineering documents that needed to be created just to falsify this, it would take fucking decades to do.
Just to do it in the 80s, yeah.
Yeah, not even the 80s. This was the 60s when they made the documentary or made the moon landings. Right. Like Come on, man. Do you know how much work you would need to do that? I think the one thing that I want to touch on in this entire movie is the cinematography. I know we kind of hit it on it a little bit earlier, but it goes from Kubrick doing umpteen number of takes on these things, but just watching the follow along shots, watching the axe throwing shots, like the axe wielding shots, down to when Jack comes to the scene that you enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, then we had the most iconic moment in The Shining, what Jack Nicholson's "Here's Johnny" scene, which was improvised, and Kubrick wanted to cut it because he had no idea where the reference came from.
Which blows my mind. I even know that 60 years later or whatever.
From what, Late Night, Johnny Carson.
Yep.
And the scene, like the way it ends up on the final film, is just amazing tension where you have Wendy inside as the axe is just coming through over and over and over, and it's just stuck on Wendy that entire time as she's just sitting there screaming. That was like one of the moments I really commend her as an actress. I know you're not the biggest fan of her performance.
You can tell she's not a smoker. I picked this up because I was a smoker for a long time. You can pick this up in most movies. Like someone who's really good at smoking, you watch The Dark Knight and you see Heath Ledger smoking and he does that French inhale. That's a dude who fucking knows how to smoke. He grabs that cigarette and it's just right in the back of his brain. You don't think of anything, he's just doing these things. And you see Shelley Duvall hold this cigarette at the beginning of the movie. She's smoking it and doesn't ash. It's super long. And the way she lights it, you can just tell she did not know what she was doing.
I mean, that's something that somebody who has never smoked, I would never know.
Yeah, but it bugs the fuck out of me. Because if a person's going to sit there and smoke, act like you know how to fucking smoke. That's your job. You're acting. It bugs me. It's like it takes the whole character away and you're like, you're dumb now. Just don't smoke. Also, just a side note about all these old movies we talk about, there is so much smoking.
There is.
All the time.
There's a lot.
Like even looking back now on modern day renditions of being in the past, in the 80s, they rarely show smoking anymore.
I would say there are some shows in movies. I think it really depends on the director of what they want to show, because sometimes there are some new movies or shows that come out and they're all smoking constantly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And there's that old show, The Twilight Zone, where like they would be like, they'd start
the show who's smoking.
Yeah, so he's like lights his cigarette and he's like, this is the Twilight Zone. And the cigarette, Marlboro Reds. And you're like, what the fuck? It's a different point of view now.
Direct advertising.
Yeah, imagine if I started off the podcast and I was like, all right, this is Nate Lindenbaum, Split Reels, and this is Zin Wintergreen. Everyone would be like, wait, what? The way that she like wields that knife, and this is interesting too.
She's flopping.
Just like, who the fuck holds a knife like that? Even if you're cutting carrots.
That doesn't know what, like.
It's someone who doesn't know anything, apparently. She doesn't know how to smoke. She doesn't know how to hold a knife. Like, come on. She looked like Kim Kardashian trying to cut a cucumber. Look at me. Look at me. But that is a different. I didn't bring this up yet. The differences between Jack's character in the movie and Jack's character in the book, we've talked about. But the differences between Wendy in the book and Wendy in the movie. Wendy in the movie is a dumb kind of ditzy girl who just follows along with whatever Jack is saying. But in the book, she's actually a blonde, like, heartthrob. She's a babe. And she's a cheerleader, and she's strong. Not that she isn't in this movie, but she's definitely depicted very differently. And that was one of the reasons that Peyton didn't like this. It was because...
he changed the main two characters completely of what he originally thought they were supposed to be.
Right, exactly. The reason that Kubrick did it, he said that there's no way that a girl that was like super strong would want to stay with Jack because he's obviously a fucking nut.
Yeah.
The way that Kubrick already saw Jack Torrance, he said, I need to change this character to follow along with who Jack is. That's kind of where it falls into line. So you get this Shelley Duvall performance, which is, I have to imagine exactly what Kubrick wanted out of this. But it's so, like, I don't know a girl like that anymore. Who, oh, look at me, something's wrong. Oh. Running around the upstairs when she can't find her son, Danny, and she's like, Danny? Danny? If I was her, I would be fucking going nuts. I would go right at Jack Torrance and be like, where's my fucking kid?
Yeah, but she, like, the way that Kubrick portrays her, that's not her.
Right, exactly.
So
So maybe I dislike the character rather than the acting.
yeah, that's probably more.
I'll concede that point. She still doesn't know how to fucking smoke, though. Wow.
So taking everything into account, The Shining definitely has sparked endless debate and analysis. But what are your thoughts on rewatching The Shining specifically for this podcast? Because for me, this is my first time ever watching it. And for you, I know this is definitely a rewatch for you.
Yeah, this is probably the 10th or 11th time that I watched this movie. I will say that this time watching it in this light and taking notes, it's such a fun way to watch a movie. If there's anybody out here who's actually listening, I have no idea, watch a movie and take notes on it just for fun. I know, like, some people will sit down and watch a movie and just like mindlessly scroll their phone. Watch a movie and try to see that work of art in the light of what's going on around you. It's fun to try to break down a story and be like, well, what do they mean by this? Critically think about these movies. And maybe I've referenced this before, but I had a professor in college teach me how to watch movies. And I always watched movies as a kid and just kind of like, oh yeah, there's that, there's this, blah, blah, blah. But they told me that everything in a movie is there for a reason. These things cost millions of dollars to make. Everything is there for a reason. So watch it like everything is there for a reason. And that totally changed my whole perspective on a movie.
Mm-hmm.
So watching this movie in this sense and taking notes on it, I got to pick up a lot more. And really what the auteur, stupid way of pronouncing author, but auteur, is trying to say about this movie and what these characters are actually dealing with.
But then
rewatch.
that lends itself to feed the Room 237 documentary about
Those are
why all those things are there.
Two ends of the spectrum. Watch it in the middle. Don't be a fucking nutcase. Don't be an idiot and be on your phone. Enjoy the movie for what it is. It's 2.5 hours. Just watch it. All right, Brody. So what's your final take on The Shining?
I was hesitant to watch it because I know it was a cult classic and I've never seen it. And it was like one of those movies that was like, oh, how have you never seen it?
It really does blow my mind if you haven't seen it. There's a lot of movies I'm like, how have you not seen it?
Yeah, there have been a lot of like classics that I just didn't appreciate when I was younger and I didn't watch movies. And then now that I do appreciate movies a lot, I need to go back and rewatch a lot of these classics that I missed.
Yeah.
And now, hopefully with this podcast, I can definitely take the time to do that. And The Shining is definitely one of them. And on our split reels scale out of 10, I would probably give it a solid like 8.
Nice.
I did really enjoy it. There were parts of it that I didn't enjoy, like Jack's death. There were other parts of it was a little slow for me. But overall, I really enjoyed it. The directing was amazing. The acting was amazing. The score was amazing. I had a lot of amazing parts.
Yeah. I agree with you. And I think this might be a first. I would 100% agree with you on an 8.
Oh.
That everything was amazing to me, the cinematography, the storytelling, but looking at it through the eyes of someone who's living in 2024, it is hard to see go back in progression and be like, well, this isn't perfect knowing what we can do now.
Mm-hmm.
And like seeing an old painting and then seeing like paintings from the Renaissance, you're like, well, you could have done this. But you just didn't know yet.
Yeah, they didn't know the techniques. They didn't know about that.
Right. I mean, and he broke the ground to try to do these things. Like you bring up movies like The Witch or The Hereditary or The Haunting in Hill House, the whole entire series. I don't think any of those things would have been around unless Kubrick did a movie like The Shining.
Yeah. I keep bringing back Mike Flanagan, but he did Dr. Sleep, the sequel to this, and Kubrick was a huge inspiration. The Shining was a huge inspiration to him. A lot of horror movies were. And without this as a basis for like that psychological horror, what type of psychological horror would we have now without it?
Yeah, 100% agree. So this is a split reels first. I think both 8s out of this, which I would say is a great movie. That's 100% watch and most likely a rewatch.
So we hope you enjoyed today's episode about The Shining. If you have any thoughts, theories, or other favorite scenes, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts on Instagram or TikTok. Yeah, just let us know.
Until next time, keep watching.
Keep exploring the world of cinema, baby.